Hello, everyone. I just want to welcome you to our webinar. It's really exciting for us to be able to connect with our readers from All Israel News and All Arab News. So I welcome you. Shalom from Jerusalem. My name is Nicole Janzesian. I'm the news editor for All Israel News and for All Arab News. During the webinar, we're going to be answering a lot of your questions, as many as we can. So you feel free to upload your questions in the Q&A on Zoom, and we're going to tackle them. I just want to introduce myself, the news editor now for All Israel News and for All Arab News. I've been a professional journalist for 25 years. Started at a newspaper in New Hampshire in America. I'm originally from New York. Moved to New Hampshire. Then I worked for the Associated Press for several years. After that, I moved to Israel. And since being in Israel, I have freelanced for several news outlets, including Newsmax and Charisma Magazine. And I have edited and ghostwritten a few books, including a memoir and historical fiction. Anyway, now I have the pleasure of working at All Israel News and All Arab News, which is very exciting. We've had a very exciting few months. I just want to introduce the founder and the co-founder and editor-in-chief of All Israel News, All Arab News, Joel Rosenberg. Joel is obviously New York Times bestselling author. Many of you are familiar with his work. Considered a Middle East analyst who's interviewed on Fox News and CBN News and several news networks. He has an upcoming book, which we're going to be talking about, which is about the Middle East. He'll talk to you more about it later. But most recently, Joel has decided that wasn't enough, and so now he's going to start this very exciting venture covering news from the Middle East. So Joel, that being said, I'm going to turn it over to you to ask my first question, which is why? Why did you create All Arab News and All Israel News?
Well, Nicole, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for joining this team. We could not have fully anticipated how intense the news cycle in the Middle East would be when we launched on September 1st formally. But of course, you and I and the team of young Israeli, Palestinian, Lebanese, and American evangelical journalists and web designers, so forth, editors, we actually were, doing this for a full month, the entire month of August, writing articles and acting as though it were live. And that itself was an intense month, right? We had the massive and tragic explosion in Beirut, Lebanon, that wiped out the port, left 300,000 people without homes. And then, of course, that was the horrible side. Then, of course, COVID. And then the positive side was the beginning of the Abraham Accords. So just the month of practicing was intense. And then we've hit the ground running. So glad to have you and all of your experience. Nicole is also married with kids and lives here in Jerusalem. And so it's an exciting project. Look, why did we start it? So many of us are concerned. I'm deeply concerned about media bias, right? It's not that there aren't journalists that are doing a good job. There are some media outlets out there still that really strive to do good work. But the problem is, many of us, if you're watching us, you're probably in the camp of people who are really worried that, where do you turn for factual information of facts that really, you can be confident that that's real, it's not fake news, but also doesn't have extreme bias against Israel, against Christians, against Jews, against peace, and so many media outlets have just really gone off the edge. And the number one question that I've been asked in recent years, for many years, it was, Joel, how can you be Jewish and believe in Jesus as the Messiah? That's always been the most important and interesting and the number one question I get asked. I love to answer it. For many years, it was like, where's America in Bible prophecy? What's the future of Israel in prophecy, and so forth? All good and important questions. But of recent years, the number one question is, what do you read? Whom do you trust? And it was hard to give a fast answer or a concise answer because, yes, there are wonderful journalists and wonderful things going on. But so what we decided to do was, let's launch All Israel News. We'll link to the journalists that we think are really doing a particularly good job, that at least we're watching. We may not agree on every story, on every idea or view that they have, but these are the people that we're tracking. What are the organizations, the think tanks, the public policy organizations that we track, that I track, to kind of keep an eye on things. But let's do original coverage, and let's do exclusive interviews and exclusive polls and our own analysis. And it'll be, a combination of that, the latest links to the most important and credible stories in the region of the day, every few hours, right? But also our original material. And I just had one challenge. I had Arab Christian friends, Arab Muslim friends, relationship sources, people I knew would not, even if they liked me, they wouldn't be willing to be interviewed, profiled, quoted on a site called All Israel News. And so I decided with this team, let's launch also All Arab News. They'll be cross-linked, okay? So you'll see, some of the big stories on the one will be cross-linked to the other. But let's create a safe place, as it were, for Arab Christians, Arab Muslims, and others who say, you know what, I'm happy to talk to you and your team, Joel, but I need to be on a site called All Arab News. And so you just saw some images there. So that's what we're doing. And wow, let me just, let's take a moment, Nicole, and just show people some of the videos. We have a YouTube, library, in a sense, channel that is show that we have. A lot of the interviews we do in the age of Zoom are 15, 20 minute interviews that people can go back and watch and see, did we I want to hear the whole thing, Joel. I don't want to see the couple of quotes that you picked out. I want to really hear from these newsmakers myself. The one you saw just for a moment there was Hormoz Shariat, the most famous Iranian Shia Muslim convert to Christianity in the world, and he's sort of the Billy Graham of Iran. It just came out with a new book, and it's a fascinating book. He believes there's more than 1 million Muslims in Iran who have left Islam and come to faith in Jesus Christ. Now, that's a controversial story for many, particularly who are Muslims. But it's a story that will often be ignored by the mainstream media, even by the regional media. But we think as Christians, we're interested in this, both evangelicals and Messianic Jews. It's not that every story deals with biblical or even spiritual issues, but some do. And we don't want to ignore those stories. We want to cover them. So that's what we're doing. We want everyone to feel welcome, whether they're Jews or Muslims or of other faith or of no faith. But the primary sort of structure we've set up is to reach and communicate, to educate, report for, analyze for the world's 600 million evangelicals who have deep interest in Israel and the Holy Land and the region, but are very frustrated by media in general. And we're excited by the doors that have opened and the opportunities we've had and the traffic that's building. It's been very encouraging. Just this week, we've seen our highest, most record numbers.
That's right. I mean, that's one of the things I really appreciate about working here is that we aren't just reporting Israel. We're also reporting the Arab world, and we're reporting with our Palestinian colleagues, right, and how they feel about the region, what they think is important news. And so also I'm not Jewish, so for me, reporting from Israel is also, I'm happy to have that broad platform, that it's not just that we're reporting the pro-Israel side. We're looking at all sides. We're looking at all the angles, along with our colleagues as well. And you've pulled out some amazing interviews in the last couple of months with leaders in the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. Fantastic interviews that people would do good to go check out later. The interview with Nonu in Bahrain is amazing. And
yeah, just on that one, Nicole, that so as an example, one of the people that's on our All Arab News Advisory Board is a woman named Ambassador Hoda Nunu. She's Jewish. She lives in the kingdom, the Muslim kingdom of Bahrain. She was appointed as the first woman ambassador from an Arab country to the United States, as it happened for several years. But she also was the first Jewish person who ever was appointed by an Arab country to be an ambassador on behalf of the Arab Muslim country. That's an interesting story. She's an interesting person. And these are the type of stories that often don't get told. But you saw Martina scrolling through some of the interviews. But you're right. We were at, so we launched on September 1st and live. And then within days of that, I was at the White House covering the signing of the Abraham Accords. The foreign minister of the United Arab Emirates, who's somebody I know and have spent time with, the foreign minister of Bahrain. I know the previous foreign minister. I didn't know him. He's new. President Trump, who I know and have spent time with in the Oval Office, Vice President Pence. What an interesting time to kick off a news service when we're seeing the biggest, most historic peace treaties in over a quarter of a century happen, and we as a news organization were able to be right there. I did an exclusive interview with Vice President Pence following, and we've done others with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who, by the way, we just did a big story yesterday on his speech on how Iran and Al-Qaeda have formed a very dangerous alliance. He gave that speech in Washington on Tuesday evening. We published the story yesterday. It's still up as the lead story because it's so important on All Arab News. It is cross-linked to All Israel News. He sent me a nice note. He read it and sent me a note. He liked the story and he thinks it's an important one. But look, this is we are seeing Israeli leaders at the highest levels, Arab leaders at the highest levels, and American leaders at the highest levels talk to us, and because they want to get their views out, and we're credible. So that's encouraging. I will just say one last thing on this as we sort of shift and move to people's questions. But Nicole, one of the things I want to sort of confess to people is my background and professionally has been conservative and Republican. I try to be fair to both sides. I was a Democrat growing up. I became a sort of a Rush Limbaugh, Steve Forbes conservative and worked for them, worked for Sean Hannity for a while back in the United States, worked for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, that was 20 years ago. I'm not close to him. I've even spoken to him directly, personally, in over 10 years. But the point is, my background and my relationships primarily put me on the center right of the political spectrum. And while we're a nonprofit and therefore nonpartisan organization, trying to be straight shooters, report from an evangelical perspective, but not from a Republican or Democrat perspective, or even here in Israel from a Likud or a Labor or whatever. But I do need to work on building out more and more sources and relationships in the Democrat world, because the new administration is obviously going to be the Biden-Harris administration, even though there's been enormous controversy over that, as we all know. But so I'm working on it, and we are starting to report interviews I'm doing with key Democrats. Why? Because you're going to agree with everything that they say? No, because it's important for us to hear from them directly, because they're going to give us insights into how a President Biden is going to lead. And that's one of the big questions that probably the number one question we're getting asked right now, right, Nicole, is what is the change of administration? What's that going to mean for Israel, for peace, for the confrontation with Iran and so forth? And I know that we'll get into those as we go, but I just want to sort of lay out those cards. We get a lot of blowback, I do, for trying to report fairly, but I still think it's the right thing to do.
Well, I like to say, Joel, that since we started this venture, there has not been one slow news day.
Yeah.
We hit the ground running. It was already speeding before we started the site, with the announcement of the Abraham Accords. And then once we went live in September, there has not been a slow news day.
And we hired you part-time at first, saying, hey, listen, we need some help. We're just getting started. You're now full-time because, wow, there's a lot going on. And we know that people in Asia or people in the United States or Europe, they've had other issues, COVID, the economy, other matters that have maybe pulled them away from the drama of the Middle East. But the Middle East has a way of sort of pulling you all back in, and not just because of our faith, but because of a big explosion, in Beirut, 4 historic peace treaties,
Right.
a change of administration and how they're going to handle, and of course, Iran now really becoming very dangerously hostile again, like in a new way, just in recent days.
Yes. One of the questions we have, going back to what you had said before, I think there are a lot of questions so far about, about how is the incoming administration. This one particular question I'm looking at is from William Rogers. How is the incoming U.S. administration going to respond to the Abraham Accords?
Well, to the Abraham Accords is a good question. I've talked to 3 people that are Democrat Middle East experts, people that have worked directly for then Vice President Joe Biden or Senator Biden back in the day, that know the incoming president very, very well and know his team very, very well. So I've already talked. 2 of those have been on the record, and one of them was on deep background, not ready yet. He isn't to go on the record with us, but I'm trying to encourage him. What I'm hearing is that the Biden and his team are very encouraged by the Abraham Accords. And in fact, look, I'll be critical of any president when I feel like I need to be, but I'll also be supportive and positive if there's things that they're doing right. And in Biden's case, he has been very outspoken positively about what President Trump and his team did with regards to the Arab-Israeli peace deals with United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, and now Morocco. And I don't see, he's not going to unravel those. His team is going to support and strengthen those. The big question, of course, is whether Biden will help bring others into the fold, as it were. Oman would be one, for example, a small country right on the Arabs would call it the Arabian Gulf, the Iranians call it the Persian Gulf, but it's right there tucked under south of the United Arab Emirates. And they have played a very quiet, discreet role historically between Iran and the West. And yet they've built a very close relationship with Israel quietly. But Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu actually traveled and visited there about 18 months ago or so, almost 2 years ago now. And that was public. They made it public. That's a big deal. And therefore, it is very possible Oman could be another country to join the Abraham Accords. The big kahuna, as it were, the big prize would be to see if Saudi Arabia will enter. And the question is twofold. One, will the Biden team give it focus? It takes attention. It takes having a Secretary of State or a special envoy, and that will take some time for them to not only get hired, but obviously get cleared, confirmed in the Senate and stuff. So all that to say, I do think the Biden team will encourage the 4 and try to bring in a few others. Okay. So let's watch that carefully, but I think that is a positive thing.
There was just a meeting in Saudi Arabia, a secret meeting until it was published in the press and everywhere.
Yeah. Well, we were the first to confirm it. It got reported, but you're right. Sorry, you can finish your point. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's that Prime Minister Netanyahu had flown to meet overnight, in the cover of darkness in Saudi Arabia, and that he also, while he was there, that Pompeo was also there. So that was got our excitement levels up that perhaps that Saudi Arabia was going to make an announcement.
Well, right. So Netanyahu went and traveled with the chief of Israel's Secret Service agency, intelligence agency, the Mossad, a man named Yossi Cohen. They traveled to the northwest section of Saudi Arabia, which is not that far from Israel, and it's called Neom. And they met secretly with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, somebody that I have met with and spent a great deal of time with. And this was interesting because they knew it would leak. It did leak. I would say they wanted it to leak, at least the Israelis did. Why? Because we don't know exactly what was said, but we know that, I know from my sources that the meeting was in part to send a signal to two places. One, to the Biden administration. Listen, this Saudi-Israeli relationship, it's moving forward, right? It's not fully out in the open yet, but it's happening and it should be encouraged. And why is it happening? In part because the Saudis want trade relationships and tourism and all the rest, but they're also very worried about Iran. And so the other message was to the Iranians, the Saudis, which are the biggest, most, the richest kingdom, Arab kingdom in the region, with Israel, the most militarily powerful country in the region, are teaming up. And that's a signal to the leaders in Iran, watch out, don't mess with us. And so these are, again, very interesting developments, and these are the types of stories that we are covering and getting very interesting. Sometimes people are willing to go on the record with us, sometimes not, but it's been great.
Well, how does this, with the incoming administration now, Trump and his administration took a completely different approach from the traditional Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. They actually seemed to leave the Palestinian-Israeli negotiations on the side, and they went forward creating strategic regional alliances and hoping to lure the Palestinians to the table eventually. So can you address that?
Well, I don't think that was their original plan. They certainly did an enormous amount of work to try to craft a Palestinian-Israeli peace treaty. And they did, when I talked to Secretary Pompeo about this for our news sites, he used the term that Trump and his team flipped the script. When I talked to Pence at the White House, and you just saw it a moment ago, he used the term, the president threw out the old playbook. Now, what do they mean by that? What they mean is, in the past, the Obama administration and the Clinton administration, even the Bush administration, seemed to make a Palestinian-Israeli peace deal the highest goal, and if it didn't work, then nothing else would happen. The Trump team did something different. They were the first ones to put out a 180-page plan with detailed maps and detailed economic projects and all kinds of specifics that no administration has ever put out publicly, that much detail about what a final Israeli-Palestinian negotiated settlement could look like and the way the Trump team wanted it to look. So that was important. But what's interesting was, as they were doing it, they realized that they were getting total pushback from Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, for a number of reasons. Palestinians who might be watching this would say, hey, he had a good reason. So I'm not going to, we can get into that if you or our readers, viewers want to talk about it more. But let's just say for the moment, Trump got the stiff arm. Part of that was moving the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, and part of it was saying that the Palestinians had to stop paying terrorists and their families sort of almost welfare money, a stipend. If you killed a Jew, you got more money. If you killed multiple Jews, you got even more money. This is called pay for slay. And the U.S. administration said, no, we're not giving you money so that you can turn around and not, run your schools or, whatever, build your economy, but so you can pay terrorists. These were some of the issues. But what happened was the Trump team, which I think was, in my view, in talking to all the key players except Jared Kushner, I never actually sat down with him personally, but all the other key players, I believe they were sincere in trying to find a plan that would generate an honest discussion between Palestinian and Israeli leaders. However, they also realized, as they did, that if they continued down that path and the Palestinian Authority leadership said no, that did not make their efforts dead on arrival. That was the term that kept being used by every analyst almost in the world. Oh, the Trump plan is dead on arrival, dead on arrival. If I heard that once, I heard it 500 times. But the Trump team knew differently. And I knew differently because I'd met with MBS, MBZ, Mohammed bin Zayed, the leader of the United Arab Emirates, with the senior leadership of Bahrain, the president of Egypt, the king of Jordan. What was I hearing from most of them? And that was, if the Palestinians reject a reasonable plan, not a perfect plan, but if they won't even come back to the table, other Arab countries are going to start saying, fine, we're not going to wait forever. We're going to make peace with Israel. And so that's why the Trump team continued, because they knew from these various Arab leaders that by making a good faith effort, but being rejected again, that other Arab states would say, you know what, we love the Palestinians and we love the Palestinian cause, but we're not going to wait forever. And that's where we start to see the breakthroughs. And, famously, Secretary of State John Kerry, a month after Trump was elected in November of 2016, in December, he gave a talk at the Brookings Institute, a center-left think tank in Washington. And he said specifically, I hear talk that, if the Palestinians won't make a deal, that other Arabs will. And he said, no, 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 no. 4 no's, never going to happen. But that's exactly what happened. And it actually happened 4 times. So sometimes the exalted wisdom of the Washington peace industry, I call it, they have an interest in their ideas being the ones that save the day, but sometimes they don't see things clearly, or they don't see other avenues. And the Trump team, look, President Trump is under criticism for lots of things in his life and his presidency. But one of the things he will be remembered for was he and his team thinking completely differently, throwing out an old playbook and winning 4 Arab-Israeli peace treaties that are very, very impressive.
Yeah, and I'm also amazed, just you look at the map, and it's also, a geographical alliance. If Saudi Arabia will join the Abraham Accords, you're, from sea to sea. It's just an amazing swath of land that would also, geographically cut off Iran. So it was a very interesting strategy, which maybe didn't get enough attention, only accelerated in the last couple of months. But obviously, it was 3 years prior of the efforts by the administration to negotiate these deals. So
that's right. And Nicole, let me add one other point. I'll make it brief, but if people want to sort of pull on the thread and talk about it more, I'm happy to. It wasn't so. The Trump strategy was actually multifaceted. One, let's pursue an honest, genuine, detailed peace plan with the Palestinians and the Israelis. That was one. 2, let's keep working on our relationships with the Arab world and strengthen those alliances. Remember, President Trump was highly criticized, by myself included, in the 2016 campaign for calling for a complete ban on any Muslim coming into the United States. I thought that was morally wrong. Stopping radical Islamists, jihadist terrorists, yeah, absolutely. But all Muslims, no, that was wrong. But he corrected himself. He changed that. And where did he go first on his first trip? He went to Saudi Arabia. He went to Riyadh. Saudi Arabia is the epicenter of Islam, the home of Mecca and Medina, the 2 most sacred sites in the Islamic faith, right? Trump went there, and he didn't just meet with Saudi leaders. He met with the leaders of more than 50 Muslim countries in a massive summit. And he basically challenged them. He said, look, I'll be with you guys if you'll fight radical Islamism. And I'll work with you. We'll fight ISIS. We'll destroy ISIS, which he did. You know, we'll deal with Al Qaeda. And he took out major Al Qaeda and ISIS leaders, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi and these others, right? Very impressive by working together. He said, but we're also, so he wanted to build a relationship and strengthen alliances with the Arab world. And that was, they had been strained under the Obama administration for a number of reasons. But the third major strategy was get tough with Iran. And that involved what Secretary Pompeo dubbed and got picked up as the maximum pressure campaign, right? Let's pull out of the very faulty, I would say insane Iran nuclear deal. Trump did it. Then let's apply economic sanctions and even increase military assets in the region and put pressure on Iran so that it squeezes the regime economically. And that really encouraged the Israeli government and people and Arab governments who are terrified of Iran getting nuclear weapons and already see Iran using terrorism and subversive efforts, you know, inside the Arab world. So Trump actually gained a lot of credibility with the Arab world, not just from the Palestinian peace process track, and not just by visiting and meeting with and working closely with our Arab allies on a range of economic issues and counterterrorism issues, but specifically dealing and getting tough with Iran. That combination gave comfort, and I felt it. I saw it when I met with these Arab leaders, and we've been trying to report that on the sites to help people understand what's been happening and why.
Of course, also for Israel, it brought comfort to Israel as well. And Israel, we just reported yesterday that Israel attacked a couple Iranian weapons sites in Syria.
Right.
Iran uses Syria and Hezbollah in Lebanon, which is on Israel's northern border. But that brings us to another question from Carlos, how, you know, Biden has already said that he would go back to the deal. So, you know, what to expect now
Right.
if Biden goes back to the deal. And I think you wrote the other day that Iran is on the cusp of nuclearizing their weapons.
That's right. In the same story, and I would commend people to it, the story about Pompeo, I know that not only was Secretary Pompeo noting that Iran is now hosting in recent years, like harboring and openly hosting the Al Qaeda terrorist leadership. Okay, that network is now based not in Afghanistan, but in Iran. It's incredibly dangerous to have a terrorist state linked up to a terrorist organization. But in that article, I also reported that Iran is moving very dangerously towards building their uranium enrichment program to get uranium enriched up to 20%. Now, most of us are not nuclear physicists. When I talk to experts, the 20% number is important because they say everything under that is considered low enriched uranium, but 20 is considered medium. And after you get above that, now we're moving into high enriched uranium. Now, to build a bomb, a nuclear weapon, a warhead, you would need the uranium to be purified to about 90 to 93%. Okay. Now it seems from a layman perspective, moving from 20 to 93 still seems like a long way. But in fact, when you talk to the experts, what they tell you is from an engineering side, from a science side, 0 to 20 is the very, very difficult job. But once you get to 20, it's actually very rapid that you can take a 20% batch of uranium, 20% purified, and get it to 93% military grade. And that's why Pompeo is so worried. Prime Minister Netanyahu went famously 8 years ago to the United Nations, and he gave a speech, and he had this image of a sort of a drawing of a bomb, and he showed the different levels, the different stages that uranium and all the other components have to get to, and he said, when you get to he actually took a red marker and he drew a line, and he said, this is the red line. When Iran gets to this point, Israel will strike militarily. There it is. You see it on the screen. That's in my article. That's on the lead story on All Arab News right now. That red line, let's stay on that image just for a moment. That red line, that's just above 20% enrichment. Because again, in the science of it, it doesn't take that long to go from 20 to 90. And so Iran has essentially gotten themselves right to where they're just shy of triggering an Israeli military strike. Why are they doing this? This goes to Carlos's question, and in many ways, what's the new administration going to do? How are they going to handle it? And I think Iran is asking the same question that Carlos is asking. And by publicly announcing that they're going right up to the line, and by seizing a South Korean tanker, they're showing how dangerous and provocative they are, and that Biden has to come deal with them. Now, why is that important? Because Biden doesn't want to deal with the Middle East right now. He has a long history of being pro-Israel. We can get into that in some of the nuances. But the point is, he's got COVID to deal with, right? He's got the American economy to deal with. He's got race riots. He's got division in Washington. He's got an impeachment crisis. He's got all of the cabinet officials that he's got a lot on his plate. He doesn't want to deal with Iran. He doesn't want to deal with a potential war, but Iran is saying, you have to come. You have to deal with us. Why are they doing that? They're doing it because this maximum pressure campaign of Trump is working. Their economy, the Iranian economy, is getting strangled. They are struggling. And what they want to test, and what they're hoping for, is that Biden is weak. That Biden will do what Obama did, and that is give him $150 billion, take off the sanctions, and hope that things get better. And the question we all have to ask ourselves, and that we'll be reporting on as we talk to more and more people, is, did Biden support the Iran nuclear deal because he was the vice president and he had to under Obama? Or did he do it because he really believed in it? Mm-hmm. And even if he believed in it, has he and his team, have they learned something over the last 4 years about how flawed that deal was, how angry Israel, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, and others got because of the deal, and how Iran has cheated time after time again? So will the Biden team craft a different strategy? And the answer is, I don't know, but that's what we'll be covering. And that's one of the reasons you and I are very busy people.
Exactly. These days. Stay tuned on our website.
Stay tuned, exactly.
We'll find out. As soon as we know, you'll know. Well, let's, I'm going to do a few more regional questions, and then we'll bring it back to Israel, because we have since we're already, in the region, we have a few questions about Turkey. And yeah, Martin asked Martin is asking, what is Turkey's role in the region, and is Turkey a threat to Israel?
Turkey is a very interesting story. And by the way, the nonfiction book, Nicole, that you alluded to earlier, I will have a book that will come out in September, Lord willing. I've written it, and we're in the editing stage now, and it will be a project of All Israel News, All Arab News, and it'll be a major project of our new media organization. But this book will take people into what are the threats facing the world, facing Israel, facing our allies in the region, and Iran and its emerging alliance with Turkey and Russia are a major element of what I see as the major threats. Okay, these are interesting because they're three non-Arab countries: Iran, Turkey, and Russia. and they've historically not had any relationship. There's a lot of tension historically, and even war between them. But in recent years, their leaders, Vladimir Putin in Russia, Recep Erdogan in Turkey, and the Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, they see their interests converging. And it's a messy alliance. It's not a perfect alliance, but it's emerging. And it's a huge axis of danger, of threat, of evil to the East. And I'm going to deal with that in the book. We're going to, we deal with it sort of, point by point as we go. I interviewed the foreign minister of the United Arab Emirates in Dubai in December, and I talked to him about the Turkish threat. I don't know if we can post that link up there, but you'll see, and you can certainly search for it. Anwar Gargash was the name of the actually Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, is his technical title. He invited me to his home. He's one of the senior officials in the United Arab Emirates. And I asked him, from an Arab perspective, how do you see the threat from Turkey? And he was very open about it. We reported on the site. I'm reporting it in my book. So Turkey's a huge problem. They used to be a moderate country. They used to be the head of the caliphate, actually. For 600 years, Turkey was the head of the Ottoman Empire, the Islamic kingdom in the Middle East. Then they lost, and the caliphate, the kingdom collapsed in the early 1920s, and they had a new leader, and he emerged, his name was Ataturk, the father of the Turks, and Kemal Ataturk, and he built a modern, moderate, peaceful, pro-Western country that even ended up joining the NATO alliance. But more recently, a quite radical Islamist named Recep Erdogan, it looks in print like Erdogan with a G, but okay, there's the three nemesis leaders right now from our colleagues at the Jerusalem Post. Erdogan is in the center, and Putin and Rouhani. Hassan Rouhani is the president of Iran. He's not the highest authority, but he's the head of the government. Those three are building an alliance. So Turkey is turning to the dark side. They were once friendly with America, friendly with Israel, but now they're hostile to America and hostile to Israel. Are they a threat? To a degree, they're becoming a threat. They're certainly becoming an opponent. Turkey has the largest army in the Middle East. I'm sorry, in Europe. If they really do fully commit to an alliance with Iran and Russia, as actually some Bible prophecies deal with, then that's a huge threat, a huge problem. We're going to keep a close eye on Erdogan and Turkey.
Well, I'd like to add about Turkey, and also looking at it from a local perspective. We ran an article. I wrote an article a couple months ago about the Turkey is doing a silent jihad in Jerusalem, and jihad is holy war, and they're quietly buying property, and they have charities here that support the Arab population in East Jerusalem. And I spoke with a reporter from Israel Hayom, and he said he's been following this issue for a while, and he's written books about it. And he said that that Turkey's eyes are on the Temple Mount. And so that also puts them at odds with Saudi Arabia, who also wants to claim the Temple Mount as theirs.
And Jordan already does.
Jordan is, yeah. So it's like a triangle of tension, but you can maybe we'll find the article and put it in the chat of the that what Turkey is doing in East Jerusalem, and also encouraging when there were tourists, and we'll get to that also later because we all want to know about tourism to Israel. But when tourism was open, that Erdogan was encouraging Turks to make pilgrimage to Jerusalem. So it's just from a different perspective. It's like he's big in the region, but he's also quiet right here in our own backyard. So, different perspective of Turkey in that case.
Yeah, and I'll just say as a little sort of sneak preview, on Friday, Lord willing, tomorrow, we will publish the 21 most interesting Israelis to watch in the year 2021, from the political sphere, from entertainment, movies, sports, business. It's a very interesting list. But I'm also working right now on the 21 most interesting leaders in the Arab and Muslim world. And Erdogan is one of them. Interesting because he's so dangerous, but we'll give sort of a snapshot, a mini profile of him among others. And then we will, continue to write about these types of stories and these types of leaders and what they're saying and why it's important. So thank you for that question on Turkey.
Okay, and just then Henri from Paris has some great questions, has several. Syria, is Syria stronger or weaker now after its civil war?
Let's deal with them one by one. So,
okay.
So Syria is very much weaker because of its civil war. It's one of the most tragic developments in the Middle East over the last 20 years. We have watched essentially the implosion of a modern Arab state. And the numbers of dead are roughly about 500,000 Syrians have been murdered or killed through the civil war. We've seen millions upon millions wounded. Even more millions of Syrians have had to flee from their home, some to neighboring countries. We've seen this in Lebanon. We've seen it in Iraq. We've seen it more than 1 million refugees in Jordan, and putting huge burdens on these neighboring countries as Syrians have had to flee. Other Syrians, of course, are what we call internally displaced IDPs, internally displaced persons, meaning they haven't fled the nation state of Syria, but they've had to flee from their individual towns, villages, homes because of the horror. You've got the Assad government fighting a civil war by using, at many times, chemical weapons and all kinds of horrible things. But you've also had other actors like Al Qaeda under different names, Al-Nusra Front, and they've had a number of names over the years. You've also had the Islamic State, right, build its caliphate in central and western Syria and into Iraq. That was known as ISIS, or the Islamic State. That was the caliphate that was leading a genocide against Christians and against other religious minorities like Yazidis. Now, the good news is the Trump administration took a very hard line on ISIS and built a relationship, an alliance with the Arab states and with our Kurdish allies, among others, and crushed that caliphate, and it doesn't exist. ISIS still exists, but not the caliphate. So my point is this: Syria almost doesn't exist as a sovereign nation state anymore. We have watched it implode. The carnage has been tragic, really a horrific proportions. And it's essentially, Syria is essentially a vassal state of a combination of Russia, Iran, and Turkey that have all three of them sort of carved up sectors and worked together to take it over. And we need to, for those of us who are followers of Jesus Christ, we need to be praying for the people of Syria, for the church in Syria. And one of the ministries, one of the nonprofits that I started years ago called the Joshua Fund is designed to bless Israel and her neighbors. And so one of the things we do is raise money from Christians to strengthen, encourage, fund Syrian pastors, among others. And we've done relief work among Syrian refugees as well. It's a very, very sad story. So, all right, that's the answer to the first one.
Okay, will Russia remain committed to the Syrian regime?
Vladimir Putin will remain committed to anyone he needs to until his interests change. Overall, I think that Putin believes that sticking with Assad, even though the world hates Assad for all the devastation that Assad has brought, right? He could have just moved on. Assad was a horrible dictator. and the dictator of Damascus. And he could have left when the civil war began, when the uprisings began. Could have just, could have moved to London or Paris or I don't know, Singapore.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I'm sure anybody would have taken him, but he could have taken his millions and just said, I'm out. Instead, he decided to kill people in large numbers to hold power, and the Russians have come to, and the Iranians to prop him up. So far, Putin seems to be fine with propping Assad up,
Okay.
but it's hard to get in the head of Vladimir Putin to know what does he ultimately want. What the main thing that Putin wants is to get a foothold in the Middle East that the Americans denied Russia, Moscow, for decades during the Cold War.
Mhm.
And so now Putin has built a naval base for the Russian Navy in a city called Tartus in Syria. It is getting combat experience on the ground in Syria. And that puts the Russian military just a few kilometers north of Israel. I'm not comfortable with that. With Putin, and Putin has invaded many of his neighbors. He's a thug. And then there are biblical prophetic implications to all that as well.
Okay. Well,
That's
speaking
the short answer.
I know. I mean, there's so many good questions, so it's hard. But that's why you're writing a book. So, speaking of neighbors of Israel, do you think can Lebanon arrive to a peace agreement with Israel without Syria? Like, will this be allowed? This is another one of Henri's questions.
Okay. Look, there are some voices inside Lebanon that have actually expressed that they would like to see peace with Israel and that they're open to it. The problem is that Lebanon is also not really an independent sovereign country anymore. It doesn't have the freedom of movement, and they're not sort of masters of their own destiny. Why do I say that? Because Lebanon tragically has effectively become, not legally, but effectively become a province of Iran. Iran has built, funded, trained, armed, encouraged a terrorist movement, a Shia Muslim terrorist movement known as Hezbollah. And Hezbollah controls southern Lebanon, right up to the border of Israel. It controls the Bekaa Valley mostly, and it has influence in and has been part of the government in Beirut, which is in the sort of northeast section of Lebanon. So the point is that there are many Lebanese who are exhausted by the regional conflicts. Lebanon once was the jewel of the Middle East. Many people said that Lebanon was the Switzerland of the Middle East. Peaceful, moderate, multicultural, multi-religious, Christians and Muslims, really not so many Jews, but other faiths were tolerated or allowed. Beirut itself, the capital, was known as the Paris of the Middle East, beautiful city, but it began to implode in the 1970s with a civil war between Muslims and Christians. Then when King Hussein of Jordan decided to push the Palestine Liberation Organization out of the Kingdom of Jordan because King Hussein felt that Yasser Arafat was trying to overthrow him, the PLO got pushed out and they moved to Lebanon and they built sort of a state within a state. Then there became a big civil war. They became part of that civil war. Then Israel invaded to get rid of the PLO because the PLO kept attacking Israel. And it just became more and more and more of a mess. And Lebanon has never really recovered. And in the vacuum of the chaos that became modern Lebanon, Iran saw an opportunity to build a terrorist arm of Iran on the border with Israel. And that became the Hezbollah movement. And By the way, I have a novel coming out. That's not really an all Israel project, but in March that will deal with U.S., Israel, Lebanon, Syria, Iran. And I do, you're right, books are my way, historically, of sort of getting into these issues and unpacking them, because day-to-day news is hard to give the full picture. It's like we're doing pointillism, you and I and the team. We give snapshots of what's happening. But something like this, a webinar, but also a nonfiction book, and then in my case, separately novels, give a way of looking at things a little bit bigger and taking people inside to try to help people understand very complicated issues in an interesting and entertaining way. So, so pray for the people of Syria, pray for the people of Lebanon, because I think the bottom line is yes, there are some that really do look forward to the day when Lebanon can become quiet again and could make peace with Israel. But with Iran and Hezbollah effectively in control with a stranglehold, I don't see that happening in the near term. Nothing's impossible with God. Pray for Lebanon to become free, liberated from Hezbollah and Iran. I don't know that that will happen until some of these prophetic events, like what is known as Ezekiel 38 and 39, the war of Gog and Magog. Until those things happen, we may not see Lebanon recover. But let's keep praying and let's not give up. Let's not be cynical. Let's show love and compassion to the people of Lebanon. And I'll say one more thing, Nicole. There was a time in biblical history when Lebanon and Israel had a very close relationship. King David, here in Jerusalem, had a really close relationship, a friendship with a Lebanese leader named King Hiram. And when King David died, he told his son, you continue to build this alliance. I'm paraphrasing, but people can go look up the story. Go build this alliance better with this Lebanese leader, King Hiram. And when you, Solomon, build the temple, you go get the cedars of Lebanon. Go make a deal with Lebanon. You buy wood, the most beautiful wood in the region from Lebanon, and you can sell them wheat and other, oil and other things that Israel has. And that relationship, that friendship was so sweet as a Lebanese leader helped build the house of God in Jerusalem. We're not there right now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we see a little bit of hope with Lebanon and Israel being forced to negotiate now on the Mediterranean pipeline. And, you never know if they'll break ground in other ways as well. And
right, and there's maritime security issues. Look, it's not that there's nothing going on, but it's not yet like the Abraham Accords.
Right.
It's a good point. Thank you.
So somebody, an anonymous Christian from Jordan, wants to know, is interested to hear your take on Jordan and the Jordanian church's place in all the drama that's occurring right now.
Okay, here's my Jordan Starbucks mug, which I was using right before. I love the country of Jordan. And I have not, as an American, Israeli, evangelical, citizen of Israel, I can't go to Lebanon, I can't go to Syria. I look forward to the day that I can. But Jordan, I've had the joy of going to many times. I think up over 12, 15 times. I've spent, had, I think, 4 or 5 meetings with King Abdullah II of Jordan. I've met with the Prime Minister of Jordan, major leadership. I've brought an evangelical delegation of leaders to meet with King Abdullah. My 2 sons, 2 of my 4, 2 of them have come with me to meet the King of Jordan and other senior leaders there. But even more interesting to me than meeting the government leaders and, of course, the royal family has been meeting the Christians of Jordan. And specifically, I've gotten to know many of the evangelical leaders, certainly the council leadership that oversees the evangelicals of Jordan. There's a wonderful Bible college seminary there called JET. That's an acronym for the Jordanian Evangelical Theological Seminary. By the way, there's a picture of the delegation that I led King Abdullah II is in the center with the red tie. Two of my sons are flanking on the two sides, and the rest of those are various evangelical leaders from the United States, from different evangelical sectors. That we had a working lunch with King Abdullah in the past. But look, there are roughly between 10 and 15,000 evangelical Christians, followers of Jesus Christ, from an evangelical Protestant theological perspective in Jordan. We believe there are several tens of thousands more that live outside of Jordan, that have moved to the Gulf or to Europe or to the United States for educational and economic opportunities. So in a country of roughly 9 million people, there aren't that many evangelical Christians. There are many other historic Christians in historic churches, meaning Roman Catholic, Greek Orthodox, Syrian Orthodox, and other Chaldean and other historic churches. There is quite a good degree of religious freedom in Jordan, and I would certainly say freedom of worship. The issue of sharing the gospel with Muslim people is highly sensitive in Jordan. But being a Christian, aside from evangelism, and I don't separate it myself, but being able to go to church and read the Bible and have a worship service, have a Christmas Eve service, Easter services, baptize people, that is all totally fine in Jordan. And the king and the government does a pretty good job. I feel very encouraged by by how the royal family and the government protects Christians. It's one of the safest places for followers of Jesus Christ in the Middle East, aside from Israel, which is the safest for followers of Jesus Christ. But this issue of, can I share my faith with a Muslim person who might be curious to know why Jesus is God and not just the Messiah? And what if they want to become a follower of Christ? That is super sensitive in Jordan. And so Jordan is a country that doesn't want to see tension, and I've often described King Abdullah as who I have a tremendous respect for. I see him as a great leader, a monarch, a moderate, fighting ISIS, fighting radicalism, but he's sitting on a volcano and he's surrounded by a forest fire. And what he worries about is an earthquake. What would be the geopolitical shaking, eruption that would cause the volcano to erupt? And by that, I mean a society that might decide to rebel against him, as we've seen in Syria, as we've seen in Egypt, as we've seen in Tunisia and Algeria and Libya and Yemen, right? This is the Arab Spring. So how does King Abdullah avoid an Arab Spring type environment? And it's challenging. Mostly he's doing very positive things, but one of the things he and his team, in my view, try to avoid is anything that will sort of cause ripples. And Christians sharing the gospel with Muslims, that can cause ripples. Muslims coming to faith in Jesus Christ, that can cause ripples. It happens, and that's a good thing, I say, as an evangelical. But it's a very sensitive thing in Jordan, as well as many Muslim countries. So let's be praying for the people of Jordan. Let's be praying for the church in Jordan, both for the evangelicals, that they have wisdom, courage, boldness, but also, I would say, for the historic churches, many of whom may, know the name of Jesus, but maybe they don't study the Bible personally, but some do and are born again and love the Lord. So let's be praying for a great revival inside all of the churches of all denominations, but also that many more Jordanians would hear the gospel and say yes. And let's pray that it doesn't cause a big kerfuffle in a country that doesn't want any volcanoes to erupt.
But on that note, you reminded me, if we have any Orthodox Christians in our call, Happy New Year. Realize Day is the Orthodox New Year. So we just want to wish you a happy New Year. And we also have Yazan, who wrote in the chat that he studied at Jets.
Okay.
So that's a great connection.
Well, I've been there many times. I know the leadership there, and I'm very fond of the team at Jets. And there are wonderful, wonderful brothers and sisters. And look, I would say overall, Jordanian Christians, they're certainly not Zionists. They don't believe that Israel has a biblical right to exist, but they are not hostile. They're not radical. They want peace. But they mainly want to focus on how to help their day-to-day, brothers and sisters grow in the Lord and be a witness. And like many of the believers in this region, it's challenging to be a follower of Jesus Christ in the Middle East. And we're going to do more to cover the believers in this region in 2021. But we have to be careful because some of them are not ready to be named in these stories. They may want to talk to us on background or anonymously. So we'll be very careful and sensitive as we cover these stories.
Right. Well, right now we're going to take a plane outside the Middle East. We're going to go to China, but then we're going to bring it back to Israel.
Okay.
But Bernice from the Philippines has a great question about China.
Okay.
It is said that China will become an industrial giant by the year 2025. How will China come into play in the end times in relation with the U.S., Israel, and the Arab countries?
Oh, interesting. Well, I don't know that you have to wait till 2025 for China to be considered an industrial power. They are one of the largest and fastest growing economies. Okay, not in the last couple of years, but overall, in the world. They've certainly become a high-tech leader. Many U.S. companies, of course, have built factories there to get cheaper labor and then to ship goods back into the United States. But China, as a communist power, is a country that's increasingly worrisome. Okay, they have more than 1 million Muslims in the western part of the country called Uyghurs. They are keeping many of these in concentration camps. I don't mean death camps necessarily, but concentration camps. They are treating them horribly. Christians are treated horribly. There have been times of freedom or relative freedom, but that is not the case at the moment. And many followers of Jesus Christ, certainly pastors of house churches and others, have been arrested or harassed or persecuted. And it's very difficult to be a follower of Jesus Christ in China. China is using its rapidly growing high-tech sector to monitor its citizens and keep a very close eye using closed circuit television, facial recognition. It's using artificial intelligence to track the movements of people, and particularly people whose ideas or religious faith they don't agree with. And it's a communist, atheist leadership. They're not interested in Christianity. They don't want it to happen. And yet Christianity has grown from maybe 250,000 followers of Jesus Christ in the mid-1970s to many estimates are over 100 million followers of Jesus Christ today. That's encouraging to me, but it's not easy to be a follower of Christ in China. All that to say, China is becoming a power, and it's becoming very wealthy. It's a nuclear armed power. It has a growing navy. It is challenging the United States in many ways. As you've seen, President Trump is trying to push back at China. But to answer the specific question, the other side of the question, which is related to the end times, look, China is not specifically mentioned in a prophecy in the end times prophecies of the Bible, but the book of Revelation does talk about the kings of the East forming a military alliance and coming to the Middle East through what we would now call the nation of Iraq, and eventually coming to attack Israel. That is a prophecy. Who are the kings of the East? The Bible doesn't specify them. Interestingly, there is no corollary to the kings of the West. There's no phrase in the Bible that says the kings of the West. There is a queen of the South. There is a king of the North. There are kings of the East. So prophecy deals with a number of different specific countries and also regions, all related geographically to Israel at the epicenter, right? Jerusalem at the middle. So, but it doesn't have a kings of the West. So we don't see specific prophecies about the nation of the United States, for example, by name. Mm-hmm. But could China be one of these kings of the East? I suspect that would be true. And that if you're looking at maybe China, North Korea, Pakistan, India, these would qualify for major powers from the East that could come against Israel in the last of the last days before the second physical, literal coming of Jesus Christ here to this city, to Jerusalem, where Nicole, you and I love the city and where we live with our families. So that's the best I can explain to this wonderful question from the Philippines. So well, pray for the people of China, pray for the church in China, and of course pray for the leadership in China that maybe they would be saved and diverted from any type of hostile activity. And we know these countries will eventually go very dark and be very dangerous, but maybe the Lord would provide, some relief in the near term.
That brings us back to Israel. We have 15 minutes left. So there are 3 major topics that I feel we need to address here in Israel, and it will encompass a lot of the questions that we've received. Okay. COVID, it's the number one question here and around the world. Then there's the elections. Mm-hmm. And then this might be the most important is tourism. But that goes back to number 1, which is COVID. Okay. So, which may also connect to the elections. So how would you like to start?
Well, let's start with COVID. So Israel has had a very bumpy ride with the COVID-19 pandemic. Let me say, first of all, that I believe that this global virus, pandemic that we've been battling with, so horrible. I believe it's one of the last days signs that Jesus speaks of in Luke 21. He gives a whole list of things to watch for, and pandemic. He doesn't use the term pandemic. That's a modern term. He uses the term plagues, but that's a horrific infectious disease that spreads all over. Jesus says to watch for them, among other things like wars, rumors of wars, revolutions, economic disaster, natural disasters, persecution of Christians, lawlessness, earthquakes, as well as the spread of the gospel, et cetera, and the rebirth of Israel. So we've seen all of those things happen in the last 100 years, in the last 50 years, certainly the rebirth of Israel. You and I are living here in the middle of a reborn, prophetically reborn nation of Israel. And that's very encouraging, but it also is telling us we're getting closer to the return of Christ, according to the Bible. Now, the COVID crisis, specifically here in Israel, Israel was the first country to shut down and say everybody who's not from here has to leave, and we have to lock our doors for a while and deal with this mess. And that was quick. It was the first country that did that, and it worked at the beginning. And the COVID infection rates dropped dramatically. And unfortunately, Israel made a decision, which was a mistake, but I'm not sure. I'm not assessing blame. I'm just saying Israeli leaders thought, okay, the problem is over, and they opened too quickly, and the infection rates skyrocketed again. And it's not just infection rates, as all of you know. It's not just, young people that get it, okay, that's not good. Middle-aged people that get it, that's not good. But it's a vulnerable population, right? If you're 60 or over, if you have certain pre-existing conditions, you're more vulnerable to it, right? So infection rates are bad. The main problem for Israel, a small country with limited hospitals, limited doctors, and limited hospital beds, when that infection rate skyrockets, that percentage of cases that become very serious and people have to be hospitalized and intubated and they need oxygen and all this, that becomes unmanageable. And so Israel shut down again. And then things seemed to be going well, so they reopened. And then the things shot up again. So we're now in, as Nicole and I are talking to you all, we are in lockdown. Again, a full national lockdown. I mentioned in yesterday's webinar that we were the only country to go into the third one, but my wife actually noted that the UK and I think one other country also have. So there have been a few countries, but not many.
Led the way.
That's where we are right now. And literally nobody else has been allowed in the country. And even though we're in full lockdown, our rates, as just got shown on the screen a moment ago, are still going up, including our most serious cases. So as you pray for the peace of Jerusalem, I would also ask that you would pray for the health of the people of Jerusalem, of Israel, and obviously our neighbors as well.
Yeah, and that brings us to another question that is, what about the, this isn't, the question's about the vaccine, and you know, Israel right now is leading the world in vaccination.
Yes.
But it's interesting, they started the campaign on December 20th, and we're still dealing with very high infections. So either it hasn't taken effect yet, but one of the things we're also covering is, with all of these lockdowns, there's also an Israeli group of doctors and scientists that are pleading with the government to not lock down and to choose other avenues to deal with the situation. Unemployment is above 20%. We have the highest rate of bankruptcy this year among Israeli businesses. I think 1/3 of businesses are, you know, it's like 1/3 higher than usual, the rate of closures of or businesses declaring bankruptcy. So Israel is going to be in a state, and of course, in a very bad financial state. And if you think about all of the people in tourism, like we have two people actually who met in chat that he and his wife are both tour guides in Israel. They haven't had work since March. So it's a very sad situation, and people are looking for alternate ways to deal with it.
Yeah. No, so, there's another reason to be praying, and it leads to the issue of tourism. You wrote a story very early on, I believe in September. One of our advisory board members for All Israel News is the former head of tourism for the Israel Tourism Ministry in North America. And I said, Nicole, why don't you talk to him and say, when do you think when is this gonna be over? When is Israel gonna reopen for tourism? You know, and your story was so interesting, although it was heartbreaking. And I think the headline was something to the effect of, when will Israel reopen for tourism? You're not going to like the answer. And your reporting showed that it was definitely not going to open before the first of the year. Now, that was September, and that seemed for many people like, no, come on, you're not going to have any tourists before January 1. What about all the Christmas tours and the pilgrims who come to Bethlehem and Jerusalem and Nazareth? But you were right. Your reporting was spot on. And look, at this point, I would say that, the streets are essentially empty. And the roads are much emptier than you normally would see. You don't see tour buses and so forth. So it's very sad. I would say that we're being told that the COVID vaccination process will lead probably through spring. And then you have to see, does the vaccination catch up with the problem, right? So they basically started vaccinating first responders, healthcare workers, people in the Army, right? We have a son who's still in the Army, one of them, and he's been vaccinated. Okay, so you'd expect that in a country. Then they started working on age, right? So oldest, and then they kind of worked down. This week, they're starting to open up to 50 to 55. I'm 53. So my wife and I will, it'll be our turn soon. But who is spreading the virus the most at the moment? It's young people, because they're not really worried about it because it doesn't really affect them. It may affect their parents, it may affect their grandparents, but it doesn't really affect them. I mean, maybe they get sick for a few days, a fever, a little ache, that they're not bothered by that.
Even
So
asymptomatic.
until the vaccination moves all the way down to at least to 18, I think you're going to see I think you're going to still see surprisingly high rates of infection, but hopefully we'll start to turn the corner. Now, to be quick, because we don't have that much time, I would say that it's unlikely that we'll see any real tourism being able to open up until late summer, early fall. I think that's the soonest. I'm not saying that legally somebody couldn't fly in for a business meeting or something. That might be able to happen sooner if they were vaccinated and they didn't have it and our country was fully vaccinated. That might happen sooner. But I think we're talking about late summer, early fall. And then the question becomes, once the industry could reopen, will people be ready to travel to Israel, right? Who are the people that mostly go on Christian tours of Israel? They're people 60 years and older. I lead these tours. We brought hundreds and hundreds. I mean, I think we brought 1,500 people over the years to Israel. But who has the money to do it? Who has the time to do it? Usually people who are retired. So that's a vulnerable group. And are they going to be ready? I don't know. I hope so. But the Joshua Fund was going to have a tour last fall. We canceled it. We scheduled it for fall of 21. At this point, we're not going to do it. And we're looking at 22 as the next time. So hope, next year in Jerusalem, we'll see. I hope it doesn't take all the way till the next calendar year. But keep praying for us. Because I know a lot of people want to come, and we want you to come. We want to say welcome. Bruchim habayim, welcome to Israel.
That's right.
But we're not there yet.
It also remains to be seen if Israel will require, it's rolling out right now, the first in the world. It's called the Green Passport. And we've been writing about that as well. And if Israel will require foreigners to also have that. So basically the Green Passport requires that you have vaccination to get into many public places in Israel, including malls, gyms. It's not, the plan isn't finalized yet, so we don't know all the details. But right. The question is whether they will require foreigners to be vaccinated to come here, which could also create a problem because, other countries aren't vaccinating and many people are still remain opposed to it. So it seems like here, though, it's not mandatory, but it is being encouraged in certain ways. So
good. And you're doing a good job covering it for us, all the different aspects of COVID, how it's affecting the schools, how it's affecting teachers and children and parents. Most people here in Israel, they don't live in single family homes as in some other places in the world, certainly North America. They live in apartments. So if you've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 children in the small apartment, the term balagan, which was sort of like craziness, circus atmosphere. Nicole, you deal with that, and you're a full-time, mom. You're also full-time with us from home, and so that's challenging, right? So you've been doing a wonderful job. You've been profiling people in business and other, in ministries. How are they dealing with this? Very, very interesting.
We're living it. We feel the pain. We're able to. We know the issues to cover because we're here on the ground. So,
okay. And what we're trying to say to people also who are watching is we're not only covering political news or geopolitical news. We're trying to help explain what's going on in Israel, obviously, and the Arab world also, from a wide range of perspectives. And I'll note, I said earlier, but I also want to give one more plug to, on Friday, we'll publish the 21 most interesting Israelis to watch in 2021. And these are going to be a lot of people you've never heard of, but that are very, very interesting. And again, we're trying to do, sort of features as well as business news and sports. And one of them I'll just tip off is one of them is an Israeli who was drafted in the NBA and started playing in December and is doing quite well. We'll profile him as he's part of the list of 21.
Well, that's perfect because we didn't get to elections, and you know what? That's fine. Go check out this article tomorrow. We'll put it up tomorrow morning, Friday morning. And you will get a great preview of the upcoming Israeli elections, starting with Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister. But there are several players you probably haven't heard of, a lot of insider baseball, insider politics here in Israel. So we feature them, and including, surprisingly, a lot of Israeli Arabs.
That are beginning to try to they've decided they want to engage in the Israeli system more than they ever have. Will they get directly involved in the political system? We'll raise that in this article tomorrow.
Right.
Nicole, thank you. I know we're running out of time, but I want to thank you, and I also want to thank all those who've been watching us. And I want to encourage you, if you haven't signed up for our newsletter, our email newsletters that come out, where we give people insights into what's going on, and you see links to articles that you may not have noticed. We'll send it right to your email address. So there's a way to sign up for emails that the team will post in a moment, but you can also see it on the site. You can also give to the overall organization, the nonprofit that we set up that runs All Israel News and All Arab News. The big picture is called Near East Media. And you can see on the screen there's a way to give through PayPal. And we would love for you to do it. This is not a for-profit enterprise. This is a non-profit. And we see it as a ministry. And I will tell you that we have some major donors, but over time, we really need to build out people who would just be willing to give, $10, $15, $20, $25 a month to support our work, so we can give this type of honest, fair, evangelical worldview coverage of what's going on in Israel and the region. And I'm grateful for all of you who have already signed up for our email and who've donated. I want to encourage you to become involved. And also for all the questions that you sent. I know we didn't get to all of them. My wife and I were talking about maybe I need to start writing a weekly column that keeps answering these questions, because we definitely want to answer them, and we're grateful for all of them. Nicole, if you want to just wrap it up. Again, okay. I'm grateful for your leadership as our news editor, and you're doing a great job. And I'm glad that people got a chance to see you and get to know you a little bit, and the work that you're doing with us.
Well, this was great. It was great to connect with our readers somehow. I mean, this is much more interactive than just writing an article and wondering if you're reading it, but to know that you're out there and where you're from, and to see you're from all over the world. Thank you from Canada, from Singapore, from the Philippines, Jordan. It was just very exciting. And also,
Paris.
The United States and Paris. That's right. So we'll continue to bring you news and continue to give us feedback. You check us out, subscribe on Facebook, and you can like us on our other social media platforms.
And tell your friends. Use, as long as Facebook and Twitter haven't completely shut us or other voices like us down, use social media to spread the word and invite your friends to get involved, whether it's a specific article or what we're doing. And hopefully next week we will post the video of these seminars, webinars, so others can watch them as well.
Yes, so we'll just say shalom from Jerusalem. Thank you for joining us, and check back for more.
God bless you.